The Mexican countryside holds deep silences. Silences that are heavy. They cling to the adobe walls of old haciendas and the cracked earth of forgotten ranches. These are lands that have drunk sweat, tears, and blood. Places where the echo of history is not a whisper, but a scream that refuses to die. Today, we are not going to talk about simple campfire tales. Today, we will descend into 7 places where the border between this world and the next has been erased, where the past continues to collect its debts. This is the top 7 most terrifying mysteries of the ranches of Mexico. Turn off the light, if you dare. Number 7. The Cart of Death, Jalisco. Our journey begins in Encarnacion de Diaz, Jalisco, popularly known as La Chona. In the heart of this place lies an old estate that once belonged to a wealthy French family. A place where, when night falls, it is not the living who roam the streets, but an omen of death on wheels. The property, known today by locals as the House of Los Gorriones, was once a symbol of foreign power and wealth in the heart of Mexico. But with power came a legend that transcended its owners. The stories of the town's elders describe a phenomenon as punctual as it is terrifying. Every night, just as the darkness became absolute, the great wooden gate of the estate would open, by itself, without any hand pushing it. From the threshold, a ghostly cart would emerge, an ancient-looking wagon pulled by spectral beasts. The sound was unmistakable and chilled the blood of anyone who heard it. It was not the common rattling of a country vehicle, but the sharp screeching of wheels made of pure iron, breaking the stones of the cobbled path with an unnatural violence. The purpose of this nightly apparition was sinister and clear: to chase the people who were out late. It was a spectral guardian, a curfew imposed from the great beyond. Curiously, this terror became a challenge for the youth of the time. In an act that mixed bravery with foolishness, they would dare each other, saying, "Let's go bullfight the cart." They would post themselves on dark corners, waiting for the apparition to provoke it, and then flee in terror, feeling the icy breath of the ghostly pursuit on their necks. The macabre hunt would last for hours, until a sound broke the spell, the first crow of the rooster at dawn. At that precise moment, the cart would cease its chase, turn around, and return at full speed to the hacienda. The gate would close behind it with a dry thud, and silence would reign again until the next night. The cart, a vehicle associated with these landowners, does not emerge from nowhere. It comes from the House of the French, underscoring an elite, controlling origin. Its function of patrolling and punishing late-nighters is a supernatural manifestation of the old feudal order. It is the oppressive authority of the hacendado, whose power to watch over and subdue the local population extends beyond the grave. The challenge of the young people that bullfighting the cart can then be interpreted not only as bravado, but as a symbolic act of rebellion, a final affront against the ghost of oppression that still roamed their streets. Number 6. The Lone. Defender of Rancho San Jose, Tamaulipas. Not all horrors that nest in the ranches are paranormal. Sometimes the real monster is man, and sometimes a single man rises to face it. This is not a ghost story. It is the real, brutal, and terrifying story of Don Alejo Garza Tamez and the last stand for his land. Don Alejo was a man forged in the northern countryside. Born in 1933 in Allende, Nuevo Leon, he was a lumber entrepreneur, a poultry farmer, and above all, a passionate rancher and an expert hunter. His ranch, San Jose, located 15 kilometers from Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas, was not just a property. It was his life's work, a dream built with labor and dedication. On November 13, 2010, the nightmare knocked on his door. Members of the Los Zetas cartel, one of Mexico's most bloodthirsty criminal organizations, arrived at his ranch. The order was blunt. He had 24 hours to abandon his property. The cartels, in their expansion of terror, coveted ranches to use as safe houses and training camps for their SICARIOEs. At 77 years old, Don Alejo faced an impossible decision. But for him, the answer was clear. With a calm and determination that defy comprehension, he gathered his workers. He paid them their wages and gave them a simple order: to take the day off and not return the next day. He did not explain why. He was left completely alone, waiting. What happened next is a testament to indomitable courage. Don Alejo was not going to flee. He was going to fight. Using his vast knowledge of hunting and his collection of sporting weapons, he prepared his house for a final defense. He was not a soldier, but he thought like one. He placed rifles and shotguns with their respective ammunition at every door and window of the main house, creating a one-man fortress, a network of firing posts from which he could face the enemy wherever they came from. In the early hours of November 14th, a convoy of trucks with heavily armed sicarios returned, expecting to find an empty ranch. Instead, they found hell. Don Alejo unleashed a hail of fire. The battle was of unprecedented ferocity. The sicarios, surprised by the resistance, responded with bursts from assault rifles and grenades. Don Alejo's house was riddled with bullets. More than 900 bullet casings were later found at the scene. Hours later, when members of the Navy arrived at the scene, alerted by the neighbors, the scene was devastating. Outside the main house lay the bodies of 4 sicarios, and 2 others were seriously wounded. The Marines, expecting to find a battle between rival groups, cautiously entered the house. But inside, there was only silence. They found the lifeless body of Don Alejo Garza Tamez. He had fallen in the fight, with 2 bullet wounds, but not before keeping his word. He did not surrender his ranch. The ranch, in Mexican culture, is more than land and cattle. It is a symbol of heritage, autonomy, and identity. The threat from Los Jitas was a modern version of the historical threats that have always weighed on the countryside. Conquerors, abusive landowners, revolutionary factions. Don Alejo's last battle transforms his ranch from a simple property into the last bastion of human dignity against an overwhelming and senseless evil. His story has become a modern corrido, a real legend, because it embodies the cultural archetype of defending one's land and honor to the death. The horror here is not supernatural, but existential, the loss of everything at the hands of anarchic violence. Don Alejo became a folk hero because he chose to die on his own terms, making his ranch a tomb of his own choosing rather than a trophy for his enemies. His story is the terrifying reality that underlies many of the ghost stories we tell. Number 5. The Well of the Chains, Baja California. During the turmoil of the Mexican Revolution, kindness was a risk and hospitality could be a death sentence. In the arid landscape of Tecate, Baja California, a water well not only holds the memory of a heinous betrayal, but also the eternal echo of dragging chains. The story places us in the early and chaotic years of the revolution, around 1910. On an isolated ranch lived a peasant couple, peaceful and hardworking people, with no company other than the sun and the earth. One day, their solitude was interrupted by the arrival of a group of men. They came on foot, exhausted and thirsty after crossing the desert under a relentless sun. They only asked for water. The rancher, a kind-hearted man, did not hesitate. He drew fresh water from his well for each of them, and seeing their condition, invited them into his humble home to rest and have something to eat. The couple shared what little they had, offering them food and a place to spend the night. The travelers spoke of their journey, and the couple, grateful for the rare company, prepared a bed of straw for them to sleep on. But in the silence of the early morning, a heartbreaking scream shattered the desert peace. The travelers had revealed their true nature. They were unscrupulous bandits. They pounced on the rancher, who tried to resist. The cruelty of their response was legendary. They bound him with heavy iron chains, gouged out his eyes, and still alive, dragged him to the edge of the same well that had quenched their thirst. Without mercy, they threw him into the darkness of the water. To ensure there was no escape, they threw heavy stones after him, sealing his fate in the muddy bottom. The fate of his wife and the murderers was never known. From that night of horror, the well ceased to be a source of life. It became a tomb and a portal for suffering. The legend, passed down from generation to generation, claims that in the silent dawns, if one approaches the place, one can hear with terrifying clarity the drowned moans of the murdered man, this metallic clinking of the chains clashing at the bottom, and the dull thud of the stones being stirred by his restless spirit. Some brave souls who have dared to look into its depths swear to have seen a ghostly face, pale and with empty eyes, ascending from the water as if trying to escape. This legend is a powerful warning born from the chaos of an era when the line between friend and foe had been erased. The horror of the story lies in the perversion of symbols. The well, a life-giving element in a hostile environment, becomes the murder weapon and the victim's eternal prison. The water, offered with generosity, is transformed into the liquid that drowns and hides the body. The chains, tools of labor in the fields, become instruments of torture and death. The sounds emanating from the well are not mere details to frighten. They are an auditory scar on the landscape, a perpetual reminder of the moment when trust was betrayed and kindness was repaid with the most brutal of deaths. Number 4. The Nawal of Cerro Grande, Colima. In the times of the revolution, monsters didn't just carry rifles and bandoliers. Some, as told in the mountains of Colima, were much older and darker. This is the story of Indio Alonso, the bandit, whose evil was so great that, to comprehend it, people had to believe he was not a man, but a beast. During the Mexican Revolution, the region of Cerro Grande in Colima was scourged by a band of outlaws led by a feared and despised man, Vicente Teodoro Alonso, better known as El Indio Alonso. His crimes were of a brutality that surpassed that of other bandits of the era. The legend, which became deeply rooted in the popular imagination, offered a supernatural explanation for his apparent invincibility. It was said that Alonso had made a pact with dark forces to become a Nawal, a sorcerer with the ability to change shape. This ability allowed him to transform into animals of the mountain, like a coyote, a puma, or an owl, commit his misdeeds, and then vanish into the forest without a trace, repeatedly mocking the authorities who pursued him. His cruelty reached such a point that people stopped calling him by his name and began to refer to him as the Devil, or simply the Nawal of Cerro Grande. In one of his raids, the band kidnapped a beautiful local young woman named Ramona. The Nawal was captivated by her, and instead of releasing her, kept her prisoner in a hidden cave near the famous Piedra de Juluapan, a place rumored to be where he kept his stolen treasures and the remains of other victims. One night, Indio Alonso returned to the cave gravely wounded after a confrontation. His transformation was incomplete. His body was an abominable mix of man and coyote. Exhausted and in pain, he forced Ramona to heal him, and after sating his appetites, fell into a deep sleep. Ramona, who was as cunning as she was beautiful, had spent days secretly filing the chains that bound her. That night, she finally managed to break free. Slipping silently through the cave, she found one of the Nawal's most prized treasures, a ceremonial obsidian dagger. Ancient tradition whispered that obsidian was the only material capable of killing a being like him. Arming herself with superhuman courage and with her body trembling, she approached the sleeping beast and plunged the obsidian dagger directly into its heart. Before the monster could let out a howl, Ramona grabbed a machete that was on the ground and with a single blow beheaded him. She returned to her town, not as a victim, but as an avenger, carrying the Nawal's head in a sack as proof of her deed. But the story does not end there. Weeks after the celebration, Ramona mysteriously disappeared from the town, and with her, the remains of the Nawal that were displayed in the public square also disappeared. Since then, locals claim that on the darkest nights, near the Piedra de Juluapan, inhuman howls are heard, cries of an agony that, they assure, do not belong to any animal of this world. This legend is a fascinating example of how folklore tries to make sense of the incomprehensible. The figure of the Nawal, a powerful and ambiguous being from pre-Hispanic mythology, serves here as a vehicle to process the extreme violence of the revolution. The brutality of men like Indio Alonso was so excessive that human evil seemed, hence his insufficient explanation. By labeling him a Nawal, the community elevated his villainy to a mythical scale, turning him into an incarnation of primordial evil. His transformation into a beast was not just a magic trick, but the physical manifestation of his corrupt soul. He wasn't like a wild animal. He was one. The fact that Ramona defeats him with an obsidian dagger is profoundly symbolic. An ancient evil with pre-Hispanic roots can only be conquered with the wisdom and tools of that same ancestral tradition. The true horror that the legend reveals is that the worst monsters walk among us, and sometimes we need to invent supernatural names for them to face the terrifying truth of their humanity. Number 3. The Curse of the Hacienda de Cholo, Yucatan. There are places that are born marked by tragedy. In the Yucatan Peninsula, amidst the undergrowth that devours the ruins of a prosperous Henequin hacienda, there isn't just one ghost. What resides there is the crushing weight of a history so real and brutal that over time, it transformed into a legend of demonic pacts, witchcraft, and a curse that endures to this day. We are at the ex-Hacienda de San Jose Cholo, also known as Cancab Shen, an imposing 19th century structure now in ruins, located between the towns of Xolol and Sitpac. During the boom of the green gold, Henequin, it was a center of power and wealth. Today, it is a monument to abandonment and fear. The most widespread and chilling legend told about this place speaks of an old master who was the embodiment of cruelty. It was said that his immense fortune came not from work, but from a pact with the devil, and that he enjoyed mistreating his laborers in the vilest ways. One day, fed up with the abuse, the workers united in a desperate act of rebellion. They waited for him on his return from a trip and murdered him with machetes. The legend adds a macabre detail. At the moment of his death, a long red reptilian tail sprouted from the master's body, confirming to his murderers the demonic nature of the man they had served. What makes this story so disturbing is that it is not pure fantasy. Historical documents confirm that the legend has a terribly real basis. On May 13, 1873, the owner of the hacienda, retired Colonel Manuel Rodriguez Solis, was indeed murdered by his servants. Records from the time speak of the ignominious working conditions and the constant physical and verbal abuse the laborers suffered at the hands of Solis, a man protected by the authorities despite multiple complaints against him. The murder was not an act of malice, but of desperation. Over time, the land stained by this violence became a magnet for other dark stories. A second legend arose, that of a cursed wedding. It is said that a foreman raped a young bride on the eve of her wedding at the hacienda. The groom, in a fit of rage, killed the attacker, but unable to live with the guilt, he took his own life. The young man's parents, who were said to practice witchcraft, cast a terrible curse upon the hacienda and all who inhabited it. These stories, both the real and the legendary, have created a palpable atmosphere of terror. Visitors, urban explorers, and locals alike report feeling a heavy atmosphere when approaching the ruins, an oppressive sensation that chills to the bone. They speak of shadows moving in the empty windows, of unexplained noises coming from the dilapidated rooms, and of the constant and unsettling feeling of being watched by invisible eyes. The Hacienda de Cholao is a perfect case study of how a haunted place is constructed. The original traumatic event, the justified but brutal murder of the master, was the Big Bang that impregnated the place with a dark energy. The legend of the Demon Master is the folkloric processing of that fact. The workers did not kill man, they killed a devil, which morally justifies their act and gives a supernatural explanation for an inhuman cruelty. The red tail is the irrefutable proof. From there, the hacienda becomes a blank canvas for collective fear. It attracts and generates other stories, like that of the cursed wedding, which are superimposed on the original, creating layers of horror. The hacienda is transformed into a repository for the region's anxieties and darkest narratives. The terror of Cholo does not lie in a single story, but in the accumulation of tragedies, in the metamorphosis of history into legend, creating an aura of dread that can be felt in the air. Number 2, the Ranch of Horror, Tochitlan, Jalisco. Our penultimate case drags us back to the rawest and most contemporary brutality. There are no ghosts here, or perhaps the ghosts are the memories of the thousands we are missing. In Tochitlan, Jalisco, a ranch ceased to be a place of sowing and harvesting, to become something that can only be described with the most terrible words: an extermination camp. The place is called Rancho Izaguirre, a seemingly nondescript property in the municipality of Tochitlan that made national and international headlines in March 2025, revealing an abyss of horror. The discovery was not the work of the authorities. It was thanks to the desperate call of a young man who managed to escape a kidnapping. In his testimony, he alerted the collectives of searching mothers. That ranch, he said, was a place where the Jalisco New Generation Cartel took its victims to murder them. On March 5th, a group of mothers from the collective Guerreros Buscadores de Jalisco arrived at the ranch. What they found was a dantesque scene, a hell on earth. The ground was strewn with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of charred bone fragments. They were so small and so burnt that the hope of extracting DNA to identify a victim seemed like a chimera. In one of the buildings, they found mountains of belongings: clothes, backpacks, hundreds of pairs of shoes, and most heartbreakingly, children's toys. The scene evoked the darkest images of 20th century genocides. The narrative of those days is a portrait of anguish and rage. The mothers, experts by force in recognizing disturbed earth, dug with their own hands, striking the ground and listening for the hollow sound that betrayed possible clandestine graves. Their pain was mixed with frustration at the insulting negligence of the authorities. The state prosecutor's office had investigated the ranch months earlier, in September, allegedly finding nothing. And after the collective's discovery, they were accused of altering the crime scene, of cleaning up and filling in the holes from which the mothers themselves had extracted evidence. Behind the present horror, there is a story of dispossession that reveals how these hells operate. Rancho Izaguirre was not always called that. It was originally parcel 446, owned by a family of ejidatarios, whom we will call the family of Don Gennaro. In 2012, a criminal group came to their house, threatened them, and stripped them of their land, their heritage. The criminals appropriated the place, named it Rancho Izaguirre, and for more than a decade turned it into their center of operations for kidnapping, torture, and extermination. This case is the ground zero of a future legend. We are witnessing in real time the exact type of traumatic event that, in 50 or 100 years, people will tell as a ghost story. The extreme and incomprehensible violence occurring in an isolated rural setting, a ranch is the same. Seed that gave rise to the legends of the Hacienda de Chol, or the Well of the Chains. The souls of the disappeared who were annihilated there, the nameless cruelty of their executioners, the eternal anguish of the mothers who still search for them. All these are the raw ingredients of a macabre folklore that is being born before our eyes. The ranch once again becomes the stage where the deepest violence of Mexico is concentrated and rots, destined to leave an indelible, and most likely paranormal, scar on the land. The deepest horror of Tenochtitlan is not just what happened, but the certainty that this pain will become the ghosts of tomorrow. Asterisk. Number 1. The Chaco Boy of the ex-Hacienda de Coahuistla, Morelos. Narrator. We have reached the end of our descent. To Number 1. A story that amalgamates the historical oppression of the haciendas, a possible pact with a dark entity, and the birth of something that should never have existed. In the imposing and majestic ruins of the ex-Hacienda de San Antonio Coahuixtla, in Morelos, the most disturbing legend of all is told, that of the Chaco, the son of the devil. The setting is overwhelming. The ex-Hacienda de Coahuixtla is a stone giant with more than 400 years of history. It was founded by Dominican friars in 1587, became one of the most modern sugar mills of its time, and, during the Revolution, served as headquarters for Emiliano Zapata himself. Today, its vast ruins are a labyrinth of arches, secret passages, and walls that have witnessed everything. It is a place where the Charro Negro and a mysterious lady in black are said to appear, but neither of these presences is as feared as that of the Chaco. The legend, more than a century old, begins with a beautiful young woman who worked at the hacienda. She was reserved and rejected all her suitors. One day, while bathing in the nearby river, an unknown man approached her. He was imposing and gallant, and he rode a huge jet-black horse, an image that in Mexican folklore is directly associated with the devil or his emissary, the Charro Negro. After several encounters, the woman finally yielded to his charms and became pregnant. The pregnancy was an unnatural torture. The fetus moved with unusual violence, causing the mother unbearable pain. It was said that she could even hear the baby speaking to her from inside her womb. When the child was born, he was not like the others. They called him El Chaco. From the first moment, he showed a consciousness and an alert gaze unbecoming of a newborn, as if he understood everything around him. At 6 months old, his mother, true to custom and perhaps seeking a cure for her son's strange nature, decided to have him baptized. On the way to the church, as they passed the spot by the river where his parents met, the baby, who was in his godmother's arms, let out a guttural and malevolent laugh. Then, with a voice that did not correspond to his infant body, he spoke. His words chilled the woman's blood. "Look, godmother, I can already talk. I already have teeth, and I'm going to kill you." Before the godmother could scream or react, she fell to the ground, dead. The demonic baby jumped from her arms, ran towards the river, and dove into the water, disappearing forever. His parents also vanished without a trace. Since then, the spirit of the Chaco has been tied to the ruins of the hacienda. Locals and visitors tell terrifying stories. Sometimes he manifests as an abandoned baby crying to be held. If a kind-hearted person picks him up, they feel an unbearable burning in their arms as if holding hot coals. Upon looking at the child, he disappears, leaving the victim with severe burns and wounds. Other times, he is simply heard. His chilling laughter is heard echoing in the ruins as he plays with human bones on the riverbank. This story holds the top spot because it transcends the concept of a traditional ghost. The Chaco is not the spirit of a victim suffering for an injustice. In many versions of the legend, it is hinted that the mother was raped by the hacendado, and that the man in black is a metaphor for that absolute abuse of power. Echako is therefore the ultimate embodiment of the horror of the hacienda system. He is the monstrous legacy of oppression, the corruption of innocence, and the perversion of life itself, a being spawned by violence and darkness. His existence suggests that the evil concentrated in that place not only killed people, but was capable of creating monsters, of giving birth to an evil that perpetuates itself. Unlike other spirits that seek rest, the Chaco revels in his own malevolence. That is why it is the most terrifying story. It is not about the past that laments, but about an evil that was born in the past and is still there, active, playing, with bones by the river, waiting for its next victim. Genera Resimond Audio ***.